Good morning, everyone. I'm Jenny Solomon from the Ohio History Connection, and I'm the technical support for this morning's session for the Ohio Local History Alliance Society of Ohio Archivists fall meeting. We're very excited to have you here. We'll get started in just a few minutes, so just keep looking at the wonderfulness of the slide that's reminding you what session you're in. All right, good morning again, and welcome to the first session of the Ohio Local History Alliance Society of Ohio Archivists fall meeting. We're so happy to have you here virtually. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get into the presentation. Everything is being recorded so that if you have to miss something or want to refer to something later, you will have access to that recording. If you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A. There's a little box that says Q&A in your bottom of your toolbar. You can also use the chat. Make sure you select sending messages to all panelists and attendees so that we can all see your responses to questions that the speaker might ask, or if you have any technical issues that need to be addressed. You may also email dl@ohiohistory.org with any technical issues. We'll be monitoring that and be able to help you out if there's anything that happens. But generally speaking, if you have audio or video issues, your best bet is just to log off and log back in again, and usually that fixes all of the problems. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator. So Amy, you're up.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our very first session of this year's SOA OLHA conference. I am so excited to be here to introduce Building a Community Photo Album presented by John Dewees from the Toledo Lucas County Public Library. John is the Supervisor, Digitization Services at the Toledo Lucas County Public Library, and he's the project manager for digitization and digital projects. Prior to coming to Toledo, John worked in the circulation department of Thompson Library at Ohio State University. His work in Toledo is currently focused around working with architectural records collections and exploring new delivery methods for making digitized resources more widely available. Take it away, John.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you so much for joining me and kicking off your conference experience with learning a little bit more and talking about community collecting. So the kind of one sentence overview of what we're going to be discussing today is just how to collect local history materials, documentary materials of your community. And specifically with an emphasis on doing it kind of in real time with contemporary materials. So kind of an overview of what we'll be talking about today. We'll be discussing kind of the mission and purpose and why exactly we're doing this and what the need is specifically when talking about contemporary materials. We'll talk about some workflow considerations, how the nuts and bolts of this actually functions. We'll go over the submission agreements for this, kind of the legal context to make sure that everybody understands what the basis for everyone's rights are as materials are being shared with an institution's collections. We'll talk about how we're describing these materials to make them more findable. We'll talk about how people can actually interact with these resources through various tools and access points. And we'll talk about what it takes to keep a project like this moving along sustainably and exactly how to interact with your community in order to get them to engage with a project like this. So just a point of note, all of the images that are in here, either of screenshots of tools or of specific photographs, are also links out to those resources directly. And I believe the slides are going to be shared with this. So this way you can see exactly what I'm talking about, kind of live examples, and you'll also be able to see some examples of images that have been shared to us through the community photo album. So you can see what the records look like, how the images turn out, all that fun stuff. So first, the mission and purpose. So this is kind of twofold in nature. Um, the biggest reason for this was to kind of democratize our collection building and our collecting practices as much as possible. And by that, I mean kind of removing sort of librarian archivist biases from the process of adding to our local history collections to make it so it was really driven by the community members themselves so that they could decide what was valuable and what was worth preserving as sort of documentary evidence of the community themselves instead of having the librarians making that decision. So we wanted it to be as unmitigated as possible and have the community as directly involved. The other part of this is that we've been trying to kind of wrap our heads around collecting born digital content more robustly. So this seemed like a great place to start. Images are relatively more straightforward than some other formats. So being able to provide that pathway to accession born digital content was sort of a secondary and also I neglected to mention this later, sort of a tertiary purpose of this almost, was also to have a pathway for our photographs librarian to digitize sort of some more random photographs in our collection, for lack of a better term, things that weren't part of a larger collection and hadn't been digitized previously because it was sort of since they were put off due to the lack of content in the collection. So this kind of gave an opportunity to digitize those resources and add them to the community photo album as well, because ultimately those were community donated materials in the past that we were sort of catching up to in a lot of ways. So discussing the workflow considerations for this, the good news is, at least the way that we formulated this has been very straightforward. For digital accessions, which was the vast majority of how we collected photographs from the public, this was powered by JotForm. So the components here were, at the top you have the kind of legal text that we'll dig into briefly a little bit more, a couple of checkboxes just to certify that you agree to the conditions and that you're 13 years of older or you have your parents' permission, a name, an email address, and then a drop down selecting between 1 and 5 images that you would like to donate to our collections. And then that brings up 1 to 5 of those boxes that you see down there at the bottom of the form, where you choose a file and you enter in some descriptive information to tell us what exactly it is we're looking at. So in that, you can see we ask for kind of the who, what, when, and where, and specifically for the who took the picture. So hopefully we can get a creator in the metadata and who is in the picture. And I will definitely say that our mileage varied considerably when it came to people entering in information into that box. Some people were very robust. They were in the minority. Most people kind of just put whatever they were thinking of and didn't pay a whole lot of attention. We got very few creators for the photographs, but we always got good, useful content that was great to add to the records. But, just because you specify that you want the who, what, when, and where, unless you're breaking that out into individual required fields, making it a little bit more intimidating, a little bit more onerous, but you might get more rich metadata that way. So that's a consideration. We wanted to try and make this as seamless as possible, as easy as possible for people to donate, which you'll see as kind of a theme as we continue to go through all the different elements of this project. So the other one is an analog submission. This was a PDF form that we created. The idea here was that folks could print out the form, fill it out, and then drop the form and between 1 and 5 photographs in the mail to the library. We would digitize the resources and upload them kind of the same way we would do with the born digital content. And then we would mail the photographs back to the customer through US mail. Or as an alternative, again, to try and break down as many barriers as possible, they could go to one of our branch library locations, fill out the form and print it out there, and have them have library staff send it to me through interlibrary mail, so that they don't have to pay for printing, they don't have to pay for postage. Again, as unmitigated as possible, trying to make sure there is as few barriers as possible. If I sound sort of like very hypothetical in this entire description, because this was never actually used by any of our customers in real practice. I had one branch manager who was sort of a power user, an early power user, and very excited about the project, that sent me a lot of her family photos through interlibrary mail, but it wasn't sort of like a real organic submission as if from the community. So this was kind of remained in the hypothetical, but that is an available workflow. And you'll see, I'll just kind of flip back and forth between the two. The physical submission form has a lot more kind of like text here, as you can see. That is just due to the addition of the need for the address and kind of information about mailing and holding custody of physical materials and all of that. That adds a fair bit of information to the form. Whereas you can see on the electronic submission form, that text box is quite a bit shorter at the top. So moving on to that text box itself, we're not actually going to read this here because it's not terribly exciting, and we'll go over the bullet points shortly. But I just wanted to stress that, a legal agreement does not need to be a 7-page, 4-point font, complicated, undecipherable document. It is possible to create something that is much more in plain English to explain why you're doing something and what the terms are going to be for that kind of agreement between the two parties. So again, make this less intimidating, break down barriers, try and make this more accessible to the public, and less like you're trying to pull one over on someone, which isn't necessarily to say that any of us would try to do that. But I think with any of us, when we see a long, complicated legal agreement, you start to get suspicious about what exactly it is you're giving up. And we wanted to make sure that that sort of feeling didn't arise in any of the people that wanted to contribute to the community photo album. So now going over exactly specifically what we're talking about in that legal agreement. Again, that big priority on plain English and avoiding legalese. So what is actually being agreed to there is the customer is granting a permanent and non-exclusive license for non-commercial purposes to the library, meaning that we can continue to keep this in our collections forever, but we promise that we will at no point ever try and make money off of it. We're never going to try and sell your material and print it on tote bags or posters or something like that. So the patron asserts they own the copyright or that they have permission to share that photograph with us. And we reserve the right to reject any submissions for any reason, and that we have permission to share the images through any of our kind of digital platforms and channels. And we'll get to that too, that a little bit more detail in the various access options that have been created to share these images with the public. So a note on that, keeping the option to reject any submissions. We did have to reject one submission, but the good news was it wasn't because it was any sort of like inappropriate material of any nature. It was just that it violated the scope of the project. So for this project, because we're the Toledo Lucas County Public Library, Toledo and Lucas County are our kind of purview. So the scope note for this entire project is any images of Toledo or Lucas County depicted inside those boundaries or residents of Toledo and Lucas County, no matter where they are in the world. So, if it's a Lucas County resident that's in, the Smoky Mountains, the photographs of them certainly fit into this project as well, but, needs to have a relation to Toledo and Lucas County. We received several photographs or kind of a scanned like early 20th century postcard book, but it was of Tiffin in Seneca County, Ohio. So it just kind of didn't fall within our purview. So we kind of tried to drive that customer and suggested that they maybe reach out to the Tiffin Seneca Public Library, that they might be interested in the material. But it just wasn't necessarily something that was of interest to us. But that's the only time that we've had to reject anything, which was, I would say, definitely a win for us. So that's the legal agreement. And now let's discuss a little bit about describing these materials. So again, trying to make this as unmitigated, remove as much bias as possible. The descriptions that we saw copied into that form were copied verbatim from the submission forms and put right into the description field in our metadata. We did this because we didn't want to copy edit anything. We didn't want to kind of correct any of the language and inject our own voice into it, and wanted to keep it in as authentic a voice as possible. The only times that really, there were exceptions to that was if there was kind of like very obvious typographic errors that were going to cause confusion to a reader. So those we ended up correcting a bit, but it was few and far between when that sort of thing needed to be happen. I think I corrected a date once just because it was the same date was formatted in or two different ways. So kind of figuring that out. But otherwise, we wanted the metadata to very much be, or the description field in the metadata to very much be in the submitter's own voice. That being said, we still do want to kind of exert our own intellectual control over the materials and make sure that they're well organized and that there's standardized ways to be able to access them. So we did that through the subject headings. So we created our own kind of controlled vocabulary for this project, working in close concert with our cataloging department, which is sort of our in-house metadata experts, and it developed this sort of pretty short lexicon of material of terms that we were going to be applying to the photographs, which was an evolving document over time. As we got new photographs that we realized we didn't have terms to describe exactly what they were depicting, we would end up going back to the catalogers and saying, well, we need a term that kind of covers this sort of use case. Can we add that? And we gradually added terms over time. Those metadata terms generally fell into two different categories. So general categories, more general terms, and specific entities. So general categories means topics that aren't necessarily specifically related to Toledo and Lucas County, whereas specific entities was stuff that is all things that exist within Lucas County. And we'll see some examples of that. So general categories could be buildings or calamities, celebrations, families, portraits, just very general kind of topics. Whereas specific entities was things, locations, organizations in Lucas County. So our city government, the Imagination Station, which is our children's science museum in town, the Maumee River in general, Lake Erie is in there too, the Toledo Metro Parks, and the University of Toledo. And these are just sort of samples. Both of these lists are quite a bit longer, but this allowed us to kind of make this collection more browsable and more searchable as well. And also these were very much repeatable terms too. If you had a family picture at a birthday party, that could tick off portraits, families, and celebrations for the general categories all at the same time. Just a kind of a brief aside, that calamities subject heading has been sort of an interesting one, especially in kind of our current pandemic times. We envisioned with that originally that was going to cover things like floodings or fires or bad storms, those sorts of things. But I've actually been using it for some pandemic related photographs that have come in. One was of a medical professional outside of a drugstore where they were administering COVID tests. One was some like chalk art, children's chalk art on the sidewalk that somebody had photographed that was all kind of specifically while kids were home and was sort of in that context. So, one was of a mall, a local mall, right after the shutdown happened in Ohio, that, it's the middle of the day and it was a total ghost town and everything's kind of covered in yellow caution tape. So those things got that calamity subject heading as well, since it seemed apropos. So that's how we're describing those materials. But now that kind of ties into also how we access those materials, obviously. So we use Ohio Memory as our kind of our digital library of choice. Excuse me, which I can't recommend enough for anyone out there who has not yet started contributing their materials online, making them available. Ohio Memory has always been an absolutely fantastic partner for us, and the staff at the Ohio History Connection provide wonderful support. So I would highly recommend you check them out if you are looking to make your materials available online. So this is the landing page for our particular singular collection inside Ohio Memory, which is powered by Content DM. So this landing page kind of provides a brief overview of what the project is, what the community photo album is, a link to be able to contribute to the community photo album. And then we see all that sort of browse by information, where you can actually see the full lists of subject headings there. So again, trying to pull out some of the jargon. So it's browse by topic and browse by location. Location is kind of a funny one, because while like Fifth Third Field is located in one specific place, the Toledo Metro Parks are technically located in like 20 different places, but it's close enough. The addition there is the decade category. So for anything that has a specific date that we know for the records, we also apply a decade to it to make it so that we can kind of gather up everything in that specific decade together. So if you want to search for community submitted photos from the year you were born, you can kind of see all of the images that we have that are around that time period. And again, this goes all the way back to the 1860s, which is again referencing that this was a great project to get some of our photographs that were sort of languishing in collections but not been made available online yet, out of the reading room and online where they're more readily accessible. So that has been a great way to expose those resources more widely again. So some of these slides I believe I did during the pandemic when I was looking for projects to do. For instance, this has now been updated, so it includes the 2020s. But clicking through any of these photographs to the actual resources will provide you the updated resource. So this is our kind of the main access point is through Ohio Memory, this sort of the repository of record, if you will. It's the main place that everything is stored, but then we build additional tools on top of this to try and make these resources more available in different ways as well. So we have what we've been calling a federated search tool. Really all this means is we kind of store our digitized resources in several different places online. Ohio Memory is the main place. We have 4 collections in Ohio Memory, but we also create digital exhibits. We create those in Omeka. We store some of our books in the Internet Archive just because that's a great book reading experience. That's a nice interface that they have. And we also do some web archiving and archive it, so that hasn't been incorporated quite yet. But the idea here is that you have kind of a single Google-esque search box, just a very simple search box that you can type terms into, and it'll search across all these different places that we store our resources at the same time to kind of give you an overview of everything that we have. It's not necessarily a really complicated advanced search, but it's a good way to do sort of a cursory search across a lot of a lot of our digital resources. So the community photo album is one of those things that is listed there. So when searching, this also has been actually updated so that you get the title and a thumbnail image of the photographs that are being returned, as well as that little white question mark in the black circle provides some information about the collection in general. And then if you click on that view all button, it'll kick you out into the collection in Ohio Memory so that you can search everything instead of just a handful of responses. So this is one of the tools that we use to try and increase access to the community photo album and make it more broadly available. So another one is we've built a couple of kind of visualizations to try and, again, just make it so folks can interact with our resources a little bit in different ways, and maybe surface materials that you wouldn't otherwise know are out there. So this is a data visualization that just lists the number of things that we have in our collections by decades, similar to what we're seeing on that landing page where you could click on, say, 1940s, and that'll do a search for everything that has that decade, 1940s, on the community photo album landing page. In this case, it's actually visualizing that so you can get an idea of how many resources we have across different decades, which again has been updated for the 2020s. So for this project, there's two collections from Ohio Memory that we're pulling. The red bars you see there are the community photo album. The blue bars are digital collections, which is sort of our primary place that we store materials. So if you click on any of those bars, again, we'll take you into a search for all of those resources in Ohio Memory. And as one might imagine, sort of the material that has kind of passively come into our collection in digital collections in the 2010s was pretty low, but because of the community photo album, our representation there was much, much higher. But that, drops dramatically as you head backwards in time. For this chart, Emily, this was something I've got an associate at work who does all of the coding for this. I just am around to show off his fantastic work, but I don't know how he did it on the back end. I believe this is using Google Sheets to do the visualization. And if you're interested in digging into it further and want to see the technical back end, all the information for it is available in GitHub, I believe. So I'm more than happy to make that information available to you as well. So the one that I like the most, because ever since I was a little kid, I just always loved maps, is this sort of a map view. So similar to whenever we have a known location for an object, we'll figure out what the latitude and longitude coordinates are for that material and enter that into the metadata. And then this is using a tool called Mapbox, which has a nice free tier, which is fantastic. You can have a whole lot of people searching this and still qualify for the free tier. So similar to the timeline visualization where blue was for digital collections, red is for community photo album, same thing here. Blue is for, the blue circles are the digital collections material and the red triangles are the community photo album. And this is a neighborhood around Toledo called the Old West End around the museum, where you can see there's lots and lots of red pins representing materials that we've digitized or that have been contributed to us through the community where we had known locations for those material. So clicking on any one of those individual pins on the map will bring up a thumbnail of the image title, and a kind of a truncated, shortened description to give you an idea of what it is you're looking at. But this is a fantastic way to kind of search around the city. Another great way to kind of like co-locate things where, you might have, especially for a big organization like the museum, you could have resources devoted to it in all sorts of different parts of your collection. But if they all have the same location, they'll sort of be gathered up here in this way. We mentioned earlier that I work a lot with architectural records. This is another great example of that, as a way to tie together the architectural records, like the blueprints for a house or building, as well as the photographs that we have in other parts of the collection. But anyways, that's getting off topic since we're talking about community collecting. So now getting into the sustainability of the project. And the nice thing about this is it's a very lightweight program. and almost in a certain perspective, it seems almost kind of funny to have an entire conference presentation about this, because what you're really talking about is just a form. We used JotForm, but the only reason for that is because uh, our organization has like an organizational subscription to that. So that was kind of the form software that was available to me. But there's no reason that you couldn't kind of start a project like this with absolutely no money whatsoever. With a free Google account and access to Google Forms and Google Drive, you could just as easily build up a project like this and have a submission pathway where folks could be contributing resources to your collections. The other thing that I really enjoy about this project is that it doesn't require anything to keep it moving forward. When you have time to devote to this project and want to kind of build other things on top of it, like those visualizations I was talking about, or programming, or outreach opportunities, or partnerships, any of that sort of thing, you can do that. That's fantastic. But otherwise, it's not bleeding any resources off your organization to just sort of let it sit in the background. If this is just a link on your website that sometimes you're really of, that's great. Other times, maybe you don't have the time to devote to it because you're doing a million other things, and that's fine too. It doesn't cost you anything. So a project like this is wonderful in that it requires essentially nothing to sustain it, and can kind of lay dormant for a period of time when you just have other things going on that need your attention more aggressively than this project does. So, kind of speaking to that outreach, I can share a few lessons at least that we learned when we were trying to get folks to contribute to this. Is that there's a good chance you'll have some power users in your regular community that it uses your organization frequently who will be excited about the prospect of submitting photographs. And you might have some folks that sort of stumble upon your websites and want to submit photographs because they get the idea, they're excited about it. But that has definitely was a slow trickle for us. We did get some sort of passive accessions that way, but not a ton of them. Enough that it was still worthwhile, because again, it costs no resources. So it's photographs that you otherwise wouldn't have in your collection, even if it's only a handful of them. But the most success we had was getting things more specific. So a few examples of that was tying things to a specific community or specific event. I think it was 2019. So hard to keep track of time these days. The Toledo Museum of Art had an exhibit that was all about kind of car culture in the automobile in the United States over time. And they had sort of block parties that accompanied it that had car shows. So our outreach coordinator, our partnership coordinator, reached out to the museum and asked if they would be willing to send an email on our behalf to all of the folks that had registered to display their cars during that car show. So asking them to submit photographs of their cars or them with their cars, or whatever they wanted to send. And we ended up with dozens of submissions based on that, because these folks were excited about showing off the cars that they had painstakingly restored, and wanted to share that with the community. So kind of tying that with an enthusiast community, tying it to something specific, to a specific event, definitely worked really well. Similarly, we had put out a call in our newsletter at the kind of our library newsletter out to our customers towards the beginning of the pandemic, asking people to kind of share their kind of pandemic viewpoint, what they've been doing, how they would describe their pandemic experience photographically. And again, we got like over a dozen submissions to that. People were interested in providing that viewpoint. And it was fantastic, because those were all very contemporary photographs that we've been talking about here. Those are both the car show, and those is everything from the past 2 years. So really fulfilling that goal of the original kind of pitch that I was frequently selling for this is trying to get photographs out of people's, phones and into our collections. There's all these photographs that are just sitting there on people's phones that it would be great to try and accession those. So again, trying to get those into our collections and as seamlessly, as easily as possible. And even still trying to make it as easy as possible. it's still can be a bit of an uphill battle trying to get people excited about the prospect and getting people to contribute. But it's certainly worth the effort, absolutely. So when doing outreach, working with a specific organization or specific community of enthusiasts or a specific event has definitely been the most advantageous route to go for this. Going for we'll just sort of make this available and people will of course rush to give us their photographs was something I had hoped for, but didn't quite happen. So what are you going to do? So in conclusion, as usual, I talked a bit faster than I anticipated. So just to kind of reiterate everything that we've been talking about, it's a very easy to set up program that requires very little money or no money to actually get up the ground and get going. And makes a great platform. This is something that you can build things on top of, either other tools and access points that are a little bit more technically complex, like I was showing with the timeline or the map, but just a great way to build outreach opportunities, to build partnership opportunities. And also, if digital collection is something that you haven't really done before, but are interested in kind of checking out, this provides a framework and context for that. If somebody just sort of dropped off a USB thumb drive full of photographs to our department before this project, we would be a little bit, maybe floundering for how to accession that material a little bit more. Now we already have context for that. We know where we're going to be providing access to those resources. We know how we're going to describe them. We know how we're going to store them because we have all of this context a little bit more established. Oh, sure. So the accession numbering system. So for this example from Karen Smith, the way this works is all of them have a prefix of CPA for Community Photo Album, dash the year that they were submitted, and then dash a 5-digit sequence number. So the first photograph submitted in 2020 was 00001 because we were ambitious and hoped that we would get, like 10,000 submissions. We also, we played around with this a little bit. We ended up, myself and the photographs librarian, she was, scanning old photographs. I was handling all the new submissions to the collection. So we ended up kind of coming up with our own system where she got all of the ones that start with 0 in that last 5-digit number. And I kind of rolled it over to having all the ones that started with 10,000 for all the digital accessions, because we were just having a problem where we realized we were using the same accession number for 2 different photographs, which caused a lot of problems. So for instance, this is a digital submission from Ms. Smith. So we can see that this is actually the 35th digital submission, because that 1 at the beginning there means that it was a digital submission and that I was going to be handling it. So yeah, now let's get right into the Q&A portion of this. So there's all my contact information as well, but please continue to submit questions and I'd be happy to answer any that you have. So the total number of participants is a great question. I would probably say somewhere around 100, 120 maybe, total over the last 2 years that this project has been active. And honestly, the biggest reason for that is just time. I would love to build an entire outreach and engagement program specifically around the community photo album, but I just frequently don't have kind of the time to devote as much resources to it as I would like to. So during these pandemic times, as kind of the library in Toledo is trying to evolve and figure out exactly what our service portfolio, quite frankly, right now is one of those times where this project is sort of laying dormant currently and is in active development. But again, is still always sitting there in the background. We did never receive spam submissions, which was something else that I was excited about. And scanning for bugs and viruses, that's a great question. This is a little embarrassing. We didn't, to be perfectly honest. I would love like a dedicated digital forensics station to kind of do that hefty work, but we just don't have the bandwidth right now, so to speak. So that's something I would certainly recommend, though, to do virus scans and all the submissions that you were receiving. Free or low-cost image hosting solutions. Yes, absolutely. There are a number of great options. So the two that I would recommend most highly are the Internet Archive. Provides all sorts of options. You can do some kind of more advanced stuff there. You can enter in really complicated metadata. And anybody can submit to the Internet Archive for free. Like my own personal photography that I do. I just like to, kind of poke around with architectural photography and some landscape stuff. I don't want to preserve those photographs over time, so I shoot them to the Internet Archive so they can preserve them in perpetuity. The other big one, which is something that I've been playing around with a little bit more frequently recently, is Wikimedia Commons. So there's Wikipedia, and then it has sort of a media library that's attached to it, or is kind of in the same under the same umbrella organization, where you can store photos, video, audio, kind of any of that sort of media. But again, it's total open submission. You can for free host materials there, so long as they're able to be freely shared with anyone. So no copyrighted materials, and including like maybe someone is giving you permission to share that, but if anyone out there on the internet couldn't take that thing that you've uploaded to Wikimedia and reuse it, then it doesn't qualify. But it's a great, both of those are totally free. You just need to set up accounts for them. And there's lots of documentation out there. Lots of articles have been written about the Internet Archive and Wikimedia Commons. So there's lots of information to get started and get going. Or the name is spelled wrong. Luckily, I don't think I ever actually had that happen. I was always able to kind of verify exactly what the description matched what was being depicted in the photograph. Or I just trusted it. Like for some of the vacation photographs from places around the United States, I had no idea what state park they were in, but I trusted that they did. So if it's a name, like if it's a proper noun and they're misspelling, Maumee Bay or something, I would correct that. But otherwise, generally just trying to minimize that as much as possible. Sorry, now I'm trying to open up the chat. Oh, there we go. Oh, and thanks, Amy. So yeah, so Emily, I luckily that didn't come up very often, and most of the time, I would say you just kind of want to choose what you want to defer to, whether you want to inject a little bit more course correction there, or you really want to keep it into folks' own authentic voice. You just kind of got to make that choice for your own repository, or for your own project. So also, since we do have the chat here as an option, I also am very curious to hear what everybody else has been doing with community. Absolutely, Emily. With kind of community collecting, both long-standing projects that you've been doing, no matter if they're physical materials or digital materials. I would love for people to contribute in the chat by, again, remembering to select that all panelists and participants and attendees. And also, has anyone that's here been doing any work specifically with COVID collecting, kind of trying to collect the historical moment that we're all experiencing? So if you have, I would love it if you would share that with all of the participants in the chat. And Emily,
Real quick, John, one last question from Emily.
Yeah, I just saw that. So what about minors? So is there any special clause you use in the form to release permission to publicize photos of minors? That is the checkbox for I certify that I am 13 years of older or have my parents' permission. That is what kind of satisfies that requirement. Because we did have a few parents that would like. I vaguely remember a photograph of like a family photo at the ballpark in Toledo, and another one at the zoo and aquarium. So them kind of certifying that they're giving that permission as the parents, or certifying that they're old enough to be doing it. That legally, according to our administration, is what satisfies that requirement when dealing with minors. Oh, great, Lisa. That's wonderful. Yeah, again, Maisie, it's interesting. It can be so hard sometimes to kind of formulate the right outreach or argument or discussion points to get people sort of jazzed about the idea. It's so funny. Sometimes I feel like you get people, you get organizations that are overflowing with submissions, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth to try and get people to submit. And again, also, if you have any other questions, please feel free to continue putting those into the Q&A or into the chat. I'm more than happy to answer anything. Oh, that's great. Something in Cleveland Police Museum too. So, Amy and Jenny, do you all know if the chat log will be able to be made available to participants as well? It'd be great to get these links out to folks and make it available after the fact.
I
Yeah,
believe so.
the chat log is available as part of the recording.
Wonderful.
Lisa has another question for you. Is this project related to the project that you did a poster session on last year?
Amusingly, that was the beginning of this year, though it feels like roughly 20 years ago at this point. But yes, absolutely. This is just more of kind of an in-depth discussion about that project. Though last year I did one on street photography. If that's the one that you're thinking of, then it is unrelated. I think those photographs might have ended up in the community photo album. Yeah, it's that same map. I thoroughly enjoy that. The other thing I will say, this is sort of going off the rails for community collecting, but things like that map too, being able to sort of visualize the material that's in your collections in other ways than kind of searching through it in an interface like Ohio Memory is great too, because it can surface errors. So it can show you problems. So for instance, it was pretty funny with that map. If you don't put a decimal point in the latitude and longitude correctly, turns out a lot of your records end up on the North Pole sometimes. So that was a great way to realize, oh, those aren't really there. We found a bunch of things that were in the middle of China that were very much supposed to be in the United States. So doing that sort of project is just a great way to kind of correct records that you didn't realize maybe needed a minus sign or a decimal point. But that's kind of neither here nor there. So again, since I'm a fast talker, we still have time if anyone else has questions or thoughts or would like to share anything with the group. But otherwise, Amy, I think we might be wrapped up.
Yes, if any, Emily just asked, did you have latitude and longitude transposed on the map?
We never had it transposed, but sometimes we forgot to put the minus sign in front of it, so it was in the wrong hemisphere. Transposing was one of the few errors that we didn't commit to that, though we found plenty of other ones. Lisa, with scanning days, yeah, that is something that we've tried in the past. We just, again, never managed to get the right marketing message to get any traction with that. I think we had a handful of people come in, but I think it was mostly, like family members of staff. So again, getting those real organic submissions through scanning days wasn't super successful with us. Not to say that it couldn't be. I think it's really kind of a matter of figuring out what that message is to your community and making it attractive to them, or just being willing to kind of tinker and iterate and play with that sort of project over time to get it to work. Natalie, so yeah, we do latitude and longitude, and that is based off of, generally speaking, the direct address. So the workflow for that is just going into Google Maps, finding the address, and then zooming in on the building and kind of picking a point that looks like it's in just about the direct center of it. And then Google Maps is nice. You can have a right-click option to surface the latitude and longitude. So a lot of times those coordinates were based off of a specific address, which is also in in the metadata as well. We make that available too, because we want that to be searchable. Additionally, so that's kind of, you can think of the map as sort of the browse view of all of our things geographically, and then the address is sort of the search view for all of our things geographically. And then in cases where, like some of our, a gigantic park or the airport or something, where it's a very large area that is covered by like a single address, we would just pick sort of a controlled vocabulary. We would pick a set of coordinates that represented the entire area and just use that repeatedly. So again, yeah, Lisa, I know my organization has done some of those kind of community scanning days, but I've only been there for a little under 3 years, and they occurred before I joined the organization. And based on that was when we knew, their experience was that it wasn't very successful for us personally. The other reason that I really like the digital submission form, or even the PDF submission form, is it doesn't take up as much of your time, to be perfectly honest. We're all stretched so thin. So the kind of the time investment, both in prep work and after work and the event itself, just takes up a great deal of time for scanning days. That just kind of wasn't compatible with what we were trying to accomplish. So not saying that it isn't great for other organizations, just kind of the calculus for us meant that it wasn't super feasible to kind of continue that sort of project. But I know, for instance, Bowling Green worked with the large mosque that's in Northwest Ohio, and I went out there to lend them a hand with it, and they had a great deal of success. Folks dropping off all sorts of materials to have it scanned live, while folks waited during a community event. It's certainly not to say that that can't be a highly successful project. It's just, again, with our certain needs in our department, didn't make it necessarily super feasible. Yeah, it's been it's been the path that works best for us, because, and everybody's going to have to decide that for themselves. Yeah, so that was actually interesting. We have 4 collections in Ohio Memory total. One of them is sort of our primary one. One of them is just for these auditors images we have, where there's like 100,000 of them. It's a huge collection. So we kind of broke those out just so that they had their own space. Because we contribute to DPLA, our newspapers are also broken out. And then the reason that the community photo album is, when we first established this project, there's not really this isn't the best word for it, but we sort of decided that these were photographs that were maybe a little bit more kind of like intimate to our community, more personal to our community. So we broke them out simply because we didn't want them going to DPLA. We wanted to keep them kind of scoped to an Ohio audience a little bit more. That was just sort of the feeling at the time. I wouldn't say that we wouldn't necessarily maybe decide we wanted to do something like contribute them to DPLA, but they all have their own dedicated collection in Ohio Memory, specifically because we wanted to kind of scope them to a more narrow audience as much as possible. I mean, that being said, they're all online, so anyone anywhere can access them, but just as much as we wanted to kind of highlight them across digital platforms. All right. Should I say we wrap it up again so that maybe more folks can submit more questions? That was fantastic.
I would just like to also thank Janet for sharing the link to the collection in Ohio Memory and your submission form, John, and for pointing out the official SOA hashtag for the annual meeting. So if you're on Twitter and you are tweeting, please use the hashtag of SOAFM20. Thanks, Janet.
Janet, always a rock star. What would happen if someone submitted something incriminating? Are you thinking in terms of protest photos, that sort of thing? So again, this isn't something that the most honest answer, taking your question at face value, if somebody submits something incriminating, the most honest answer I can give, obviously, is I would push that up my reporting line and make sure that my administration was the ones that were weighing in on that. To be perfectly honest, that is how I would do that. Luckily, again, no one has done that, so I don't know. But yeah, I would get my leadership team involved and have them make that decision, because I would say that's probably above my pay grade. So that's a good question. I mean, when you're no, absolutely, because that is the scary part with this, is if it's an open submission, anybody can send anything. I honestly, for inappropriate submissions, I was thinking, bored teenagers sending, inappropriate pictures from skin mags, that sort of thing, that sort of photograph. But none of that has happened. It's really just been people that have been interested in contributing to their local history, or local history enthusiasts, or photography enthusiasts. Because that's the other thing too. If your community has a camera club or a photography club, we're interested in from the local history perspective, but that's a great partnership to develop, and something that's kind of been on the back burner for me for a while. Is to work with people that are, folks that are creating lots of photographs anyways, who are interested in that, just giving them another place to store them. That's pretty funny, Maisie. I can imagine. Again, that's partially why we haven't gotten a lot of submissions at the police museum. Our target audience are either on the job or protesting or potentially doing something illegal, that's a fantastic point. Nina says we have some photographs of people wearing blackface. For example, we decided we would keep it in the archives for a record, but would not post these on social media, which would allow people to tag profiles of individuals who are still alive. Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, that's a great point, Nina. I mean, we want to preserve the historical record, but how widely we're publicizing that historical record is a very different conversation. So it's certainly possible to kind of have those. To save that material and to make it available to keep people of account, and to just preserve our history, but doesn't necessarily mean it needs to end up on a Facebook page where it can do harm. Okay.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one last question, if anybody has one.
And kudos to all you. Thank you for being such an engaged and interactive audience. This is wonderful. This has been great discussion.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all of you for coming, and for being so interactive and engaged during this first session. Like John said, it's been a very early morning, I think, for most of us. So thank you for your participation. And thank you, John, for your presentation. This was really great. I learned a lot.
Thanks again for the invitation. And please, do not, anyone that's watching this, if you have questions or follow-up or anything, do not hesitate to hit me up on any of those communication channels there. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff.
All right. Well, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference, and see you all virtually soon.